Hello everybody, welcome back to a new episode of Dev Drawer. In the last few videos we were creating a CRUD system. We finished up that with our fourth video of the series, and today we're actually going to be starting a new project to kind of go over the basics of object-oriented programming. So this first video should be fairly quick, but we're going to essentially go over what is object-oriented programming, or OOP, and we're going to be setting up some ways to kind of show how it looks as you work into it. So what is the advantages of object-oriented programming? Well, it's easy to manage, it's easy to use, you prevent repetition, and it makes it a lot faster whenever you're developing large projects. The core concepts of OOP is that you have a class, you have objects, you have properties, and you have methods. The methods is pretty much functions. If you've ever worked with any PHP programming, you've probably worked with the function. In our CRUD tutorials that we previously did, we used functions. So they're essentially the same thing inside of object-oriented programming. So first thing we want to do is talk about classes. So classes manages a task or a topic, and it's kind of like the blueprint to a house. And then you can think about the objects as like the house is being built from the blueprint. That would be an instance of a class. And then you have properties, like you have your house color, how many rooms, how many windows, etc. And those are variables of an object. And then lastly, you have methods, which would be the actions that you perform on your objects. So new paint to an old house, adding new rooms, adding new windows to your house. That's reliant on your blueprint. So that's kind of like a general overview of object-oriented programming. So I already created a simple website. Currently it has nothing in it. As you can see here, it just has a blank page. I'm going to go ahead and kind of show you some of the simplistic ways to get started with object-oriented programming, and this will probably be the first part of maybe 2 or 3 different videos. We're just going to go over the basics and kind of create a foundation of what you're going to do. So first thing I want to do is create a index.php, because that's where our home files are going to live. And again, we're going to type in HTML5 just to go ahead and populate all of this, even though we won't be using any of the actual HTML code. Everything that I'm going to be showing you in this tutorial is going to be just done inside of the above the HTML file. So as usual, I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder called includes, and then inside of that includes folder, I'm going to create a file called functions.php. And then I'm also going to create a class, and since we did employees in our CRUD tutorial, I'll go ahead and stick with that theme. So I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call it class.employees.php. So the reason why I created the functions.php is the way that we can kind of simplify how we're calling and including these classes. So right now it's only one class, so it's pretty easy, but we'll go ahead and include, and then we're going to include class.employees.php, and let's save that. And then, oh, that's not where I want to put that at. I want to put that in the functions, not the class, because we need to include the class. And then we need to go over here, and we're going to do PHP, and I can just go ahead and paste that, and it's going to be functions.php is going to be what we're including here. So I'm going to go ahead and add my PHP tag to this here, because I forgot to do that. Alright, so now we have the basic file structure that we're going to be using for this tutorial. So if we refresh, we need to put our folder, so functions.php. There we go. Alright, so now we have our functions that are going to be included. We're going to create our class, and we don't need this functions.php anymore because we're going to be doing everything inside of our class.php. So first thing we want to talk about, or first thing I want to show you, is how to create a class. Class is pretty simple to initiate. Essentially what you need to do is just start with our PHP, and I'm going to say that this is the employee class, and we're going to do class employees. And that's it. That's how you create a class. Inside of this class, we're going to start adding some methods and properties and all this other kind of good stuff. So we're going to, let's go ahead and add some comments for our properties. And we're going to do another one for our methods, so whenever we get there, we know what we're looking at. Whenever you're creating a class, you should not use reserved words like global, return, private, public, any of those things that are reserved for PHP. It'll end up breaking your code. And then the class name should also be capitalized that use camel case format. So you see the first letter of my class is capitalized. If I wanted to add a secondary word to it, so let's say if I want to do employees, I would do camel case. So the next word starts with a capital letter as well. We're not going to do employees admin. We're just going to do employees right now. All right, so let's talk about the properties a little bit. The properties that you have public, private, and protected properties. A public property is a property that can be used everywhere. It can be called from the front end. It can be called from the back end. A private is a property that can be declared within a class, and then a protected can be declared within a class or another class that inherits the declared class. It will go over the whole thing. So right now we're just going to use one class, so we're not even going to worry about going into the protected properties. We're just going to be using the public and private. So initially we'll start off with the public, so I can kind of give you an idea of what all that looks like. So inside of our class employees, we're just going to define a few things. So let's say we want to do a public company name, and we're just going to name this Acme Company. Okay, and then let's go ahead and create a few things for our employees themselves. So contact info, and then this is going to be an array of data. It's going to be a variable that is an array. So let's say for the default contact information, we're going to do an email, and we're just going to set it at test@example.com for this tutorial. Let's do another one for phone, and it's just going to be 12345678990. And then lastly we'll do, I don't know, a fax, and then we're going to do 12345678999, and there. Nope. There. Okay. Wow. Okay, my typing's always so bad. Okay. All right, so we got our contact info. Let's go ahead and also do a public title, and we're not going to set any default values to that like we did the other ones. I'm just kind of showing you the difference between the two of them. So then let's also do a public name. Okay, so now we have our employees class with some properties that are set. So I'm going to come over here to our index.php and just kind of show you what it looks like. Essentially what you need to do whenever you're calling a class, you need to actually initialize it. So we're going to create a variable called employees, and it's going to equal to new employees, which is the name of our class. So now we have that class available to us here. So I'm going to go ahead and do a var dump, and this is just going to show me everything that's inside of this employees class, or inside of this employees variable. Now you'll notice up here I started to type a parentheses. That's because whenever you're creating whenever you're initializing this class, you can do it like we do right now because there's no constructor added to it. But if there was a constructor, we would add the parentheses to it. So for right now, we're just going to take that away until we added a constructor and a destructor to our class. But for right now, we should be able to go over to our index.php and do a refresh, and you can see that it shows us all of the values that are available to us for this class. So let's go in here and let's just echo out a few things. So we currently have the var dump of everything. I'm going to go ahead and do break tag just so there's some spacing in between. And then we declared our variable as employees, and I'm going to call the company name directly. Now if I refresh this, it says Acme Company. So whenever I was talking earlier about public and private and protected, right now this is public and I can call it directly. But if I change this to private and I refresh the screen, it now gives me a fatal error that cannot access a private property, because this private property has to be called inside of another class. But we'll get into that in just a moment. But for right now, we're just going to kind of go over the public variables. All right, so we got our company name being displayed in the index.php. But let's say, what happens if we want to change that company name? So right now it's displaying what the default is that we have set. So if nothing else runs, it's setting it as Acme Company. But let's say we want it to come over here and we want to do employees, company name equals new company name. So this right here will set that company name from Acme, and it will keep it at new company name. So everything that comes below this that uses that same functionality without declaring a new employees will use new company name as the company name rather than using Acme. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to just put another break tag here so you can see it, and then I'm going to echo out. I'm going to copy this, and we're just going to echo it out again so you can see what happened. Now we come back over here to refresh our page, and you see that it says new company name. So no matter how many times we call this, it's never going to go back to Acme Company unless we reinitialize this new employees with using, employees 2 equals new employees, and then we could do employees 2 company name, and it will go back to Acme. All right, so let's say we want to create a function to change the company in real time. So let's go back to our classes, and this would turn into a method. So this method again is just like functions. So normally you would do, functions change company, and then that's how we typically did it in our previous tutorial. So for this tutorial, we're going to use it as a method, and it's going to be a public method because we want to be able to access this from the front end. So inside of this, we want to use there is a variable that's called this, and this is just a reserved name. Hold on, let me finish this. Okay, so this is just it's a reserved word used by PHP. It's a pseudo variable, and it's a reserved keyword, and it's only available inside of methods. It refers to the object of a current method. So this calls pretty much any other method that we create. We can do this change company in another function, or we can do this title to get the title that's set up here. And I'll show you how to call another method inside of a method using this, but for right now we're going to go ahead and use this function that we created on the front end. So let's come over here, and we got that echoed out. So let's say we want to do employees, because we're again calling that class, and we're going to do the change company function or method, and we're just going to change it to, I don't know, third company name. And then let's take what we have here and just echo it out again, so you can see that now we're using a method to change that variable. And again, once we change it, it stays that way. So it doesn't matter how many times or where else we echo this out, as long as we're using this initialization of this class, it will be there, and it will never go back to Acme or new company unless we tell it to. All right, so let's say we have these variables here for contact information and title and name. So let's say we want to go over here and create a new method to set an employee. So we're going to do, again, public function, and we're going to call it set employee. And now we have these variables that are available to us. So let's do this, name equals name. And let me go ahead and add the variables we want to pass to it here. So name, title, email, phone, and finally fax. And then we can take this and we're going to do title, and that's going to be the variable title. And then we're going to do the so this one is an array, so we got to call it like an array. So contact info, and then we're going to pass that email in the multi-dimensional array. And then we're going to pass the email variable that we will create. And then I'm just going to go ahead and change these up. So we're also going to pass phone, and we're going to pass fax. So phone, fax. Okay, so now we have a public function that refers to setting an employee that's not currently there, because currently we don't have anything here, and this information here is just default for the company, I guess. But we can actually set it per employee if we want to. And I'm going to go ahead and change this just because the naming of it needs to be the same. So we're going to do set company there, and over here set company here. Okay, so now we have our function that we want to be able to create or change up the information that's being stored currently for an employee. So we're going to again call our class, and then we're going to use that function that we just created called setEmployee, and then we're going to pass over those variables that we need. So let's say the name can be John Doe, the position can be developer, and let's do John Doe at example.com, and then his phone number can be 555-55-5555. Okay, so now let's again do this var dump that we've done so you can see what it changes to. So we go back to our home page and we refresh. Too few arguments. So we got name, title, email, phone, and we didn't pass a fax. So phone and fax. Let's go ahead and add a fax here. So this is going to be 555-555-5556. Okay, so now if we refresh, you can see that this is what it looked like prior to us doing that set employee method. And now we have email, phone, and fax, which matches what we just added to it, as well as the title and the name of the person, still at the third company name. Okay, so this is the way that you would call a method to set something. The same way you did with the set company. It's just you're essentially running a function, or in this case a method. But it's the same thing you would normally do. You just you call the class before you call the function. Okay, so I'm gonna come in here and show you a way that we can reset it. So I'm gonna go ahead and take this off. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna go ahead and take all of this down to here. I'm gonna comment it out so that it kind of clears up our screen a little bit. Okay, so now that's what we have currently for John Doe. But let's say we wanted to keep John Doe as he is, but we want to create a new employee. And this isn't changing a database or anything like that. It's just creating a new variable for this employee. So we're going to copy this over, but instead of using employee, since we've already declared that, we're just going to say employee 1. And then we're going to copy this over, and we're going to do, this is going to be Jane Doe, who is a designer. And let's change the email so everything can be seen that it's changing. And since this is employee 1, we're just going to do 111, 111, 1111. And then the fax, we can do the same thing with the 2. Okay, so now if we take this and we can dump out employee 1, you'll see that now we should have 2. So we have set employee, okay, employee 1, set employee. There we go. Now we have Jane Doe, designer, Jane Doe, whereas, so we're using the same function the way that we normally would, using a different call of the class. And then we can come in here and do this again. So let's copy all of this, and we're going to do employee 2. And let's say his name is Bob Doe, and he's also a designer, but we're going to change Bob. And then we're going to dump employee 2. So go back to our browser, and now we have Bob Doe. So we're able to change this, the variables that we're setting. We're able to modify these properties using the methods that we've created. Alright, so now we need to create a constructor. I told you earlier where up here for the on the index.php we're not calling this with the parentheses because we don't have a constructor. Well, now we're going to create a constructor. A constructor is a public method that is called when an object is created from a class, and it should always have a public visibility. On the opposite side of that, you have a destructor, which is a public method that is called when an object destructs, usually at the end of the script. So a constructor, every single time this class is called, the constructor will appear. At the end of everything, the destructor will appear. So let's go over to our class, and I'm going to go up to the very top above our properties, and I'm going to create a public function called construct. And we have to have underscores on it. Struct. And I'm going to go ahead and say that this is the constructor. The constructor. And then I'm also going to, constructor. Okay. Alright. Then we're going to change this to destructor. It still doesn't look right. Destructor. Okay. Okay. Which also means that this one is wrong. Okay. Construct. And then this one is going to be called destruct. Alright. And you don't have to pass anything to it. Essentially, this just runs every time the class is called. This runs at the end of everything. So inside of this, I'm just going to echo out, echo construct run, and then I'm going to add a break tag to the end of it. So now if we go and run this, you see every single time that class is called, that construct run appears, because it's running every single time this class is initialized. It just pushes it out. Okay, so now that we got the construct method created, we're going to go ahead and create the destruct method. Typically with your destruct you would want to run cleanup, but for this one we're just going to echo out something so you can kind of see how it looks. And you can echo it out multiple ways. I don't know if you've seen my typing, but I usually use the single quotes to echo out something. So I'll show you how to do it both ways, but the way that I do it, just because it's easier for me to read, is let's say the employee named, and then we're going to do this name has a title of this title in let's leave that one as it is right now, and let's just add a break tag to the end of it. So let's go ahead and refresh our page, and you'll see now at the end of all of the code it's running through. So we got John Doe, Jane Doe, Bob Doe. So Bob Doe is last, Jane Doe, John Doe, and it's displaying all of the information that is presented to them. So right now you have where I normally type it, but you could also do something like this, where I'm gonna copy this. I'm gonna copy this over, and you could run something. Instead of doing this, you could do something like this, and it'll produce the same thing for you. And then, so if you use the double quotes, you can just put it in there inside of it like it is. Refresh, it shows the same thing. Personal preference, I just do it probably the harder way, just because for me it's easier for me to understand this whenever I'm looking through the code. But you can do it either way, and you can do that whenever you're creating any of your other methods. You could do it the same way with the double quotes, but that's just kind of a difference between the single quotes and the double quotes. Just in case anybody uses the double quotes, there is some short code of functionality that you can do there. Okay, so now let's go back to our index page, and we created the new employee 2, and we've already dumped out the variables. So we've got into constructors, deconstructors. So let's talk about what is private versus public. So I kind of went over it earlier, where a private variable is something that it's only used within the method or the class that it's being called in. The public is used everywhere, and then protected is used within the class or the class that inherits the declared class. So you can call a protected variable from another class, just like we created the class employee. You can create another class and then call a protected property from this class in a separate class. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on creating some private variables, so you can kind of see the difference. So let's say we want to do private state, and for this private state, if we tried to call it directly, just like I showed you earlier, if we try to call it directly here, so if we do employee 2, and let's say we want it to be just tell us what the state is, then it's going to throw an error. So if we refresh, throws an error, cannot access a private property. So what we need to do is we need to create a function that can set or get the state in real time, because right now it's just a variable that has nothing in it. We set it to public. You can see that in what it's returning. It's returning a null because there's nothing in it. So we're going to set this variable within another method. So let's come down here, and because it's a private variable, we need to create a function within this class, or a method within this class, that can grab that variable to display it publicly. So we're going to create a public function, and we're going to call it set state, and then we're going to pass a state variable to it. That's not what I wanted to do. This is. Okay, and then we're just going to do this get state, and we're going to pass that state variable. And then we're going to create another function. So public function, let's do this one as a private function. So private function get state. So we wouldn't even be able to call this function directly either. So inside of this, we're just going to set the state to equal state. So now, if we create a call to that method in the front end, so let's say instead of doing this, because we know that doesn't work, let me go ahead and add a break tag here so we can see what we're doing. And I'm going to set one for employees, the regular employees before anything else is set. So the John Doe version of this class is going to, let's say we want to set a state of New York. So set state, and then we're going to pass New York to that function. So now, let's refresh this. Undefined variable state, and line 44 state. Oh, I gotta pass the variable to it. Okay, so now it's working. It's not holding it against us that we don't have. It's a private variable and a private function. It's not holding that against us because we're calling it from a public method instead of a private method. So what we need to do is let's show you the difference of what it will look like. So I'm going to go over here and say in this state. So if we refresh, we'll see that John Doe, since we added it to the first employees call to this class, where John Doe is being set, his state is now changed to New York, where the other ones are currently blank. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go and do the other ones as well. So we're going to do employee 1 set state, employee 2 set state. Let's change it to I don't know, Florida, and then let's change it to California. Alright, so now if we go back to our page and refresh, now it says what state that they're in. Even though it is a private variable, because we're calling it from a public method that is referencing even a private method, it's still able to grab that state for us and allow us to view it. So it's setting it here, I guess, the simpler terms for it. But what we might want to do is, let's say that instead of just displaying a state, let's say we want to have some states are allowed and some states aren't allowed. So let's do another private allowed states equals, and let's do it as an array so we can do a few of them. So let's say California, and then we're going to do another one for New York, and then another one for Florida, and lastly, let's say Mississippi. Okay, so now we have these allowed states. If anything falls outside of this allowed state, we don't want it to actually set the state. And the way that you do that is we can take what we have here and we can wrap it in an if statement. So we're going to do if in array, because what we set up there is an array, and if the state that's being sent over is inside of this private method allowed states, which will, in array just basically looks through the array to see if what we're adding to it is inside of it. If it is, then we're going to set the state. Else, we're going to come in here and say this state equals, I'm just going to put some code in here so we can see the difference of it. So state not allowed. And then let's close out our if statement with an end if. So now the same functionality that we just ran, if we let's go back over here, and we currently have New York, Florida, and California, which all are allowed, as well as Mississippi. So if we change this to Alabama, and then we go back to our site and refresh the page, it now says that Bob Doe is in a state that is not allowed. And you can change that. I mean, right now I'm just echoing it out, but you could actually make it say, whatever you wanted it to say. So we're setting it post running the construct, and then it's being displayed in the destruct, because at the very end of the script, after everything's already gathered, it's showing what we want it to. So if we change this back to let's say Mississippi, and then we refresh, now it's in Mississippi. So this is a way that you can access a private array and use it inside of a private function, but be able to display it publicly. Let's see. So I think for this tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and cut it off here. So we're roughly at about 35 minutes. Trying to prevent myself from keep hitting these hour-long tutorials. But for right now, we went over how to create a class, how to create a construct and a destruct, how to set properties, how to create methods that use those properties, private versus public, and then how to call those functions or those methods and the class on the front end. So some things to remember for this tutorial would be to think about OOP as a house. So you got your class is the blueprints, your I don't know how to say, how did I phrase that previously? Your class is the blueprint, your object is the house that's built, Your properties is how many windows, what color is the house, how many windows, and then your methods is things that you can do to change it. So actions being performed, so new paint, room expansions, so forth and so on. Whenever you are thinking about public versus private, you want to remember that your house is visible to the public, but your rooms and your internal doors are not. So whenever you're thinking about public versus private, consider what should be visible to the public, and everything else should be private or protected, because it'll prevent you from directly calling objects, because it's a bad practice. You need to force yourself to use private as often as possible to prevent you from accidentally calling these objects directly. So, for example, we have our public company name. That would be something that would, maybe if it was in a fully functional CRUD system, that would be something that would be public, because it's something that would be visible on the outside of your house. It's your address. The public contact information for the company, that could be something that's public. Or you could set it as private contact information, so contact employee information could be private. The people that work inside of the company, maybe they need to be private as well. So whenever you're building this, just think about it as, you're building a house. What do you want people to see versus what do you want to be hidden inside of the walls? Whenever you are creating these methods, using setters and getters and setters are best practice. Like you can see here, we have set company, set employee, set state, get state. So this is what you would consider a setter or a getter. Basically, that just means that you name your method appropriately. When you want to pull something, you would name it something like get something. If you want to set something, you would name the method pull something. So this is kind of like a very basic general overview of how to get started with OOP. In the next tutorial, I want to talk about inheritance and abstraction, interfaces and traits, and then depending on how long that video is, I might create a third video where we go into constants, static, namespaces, how to set up an autoloader. So this is kind of basically, we're going to go through OOP, and I'm going to show you the very basics of it, and then maybe towards the end of it we'll actually build something very simple with it. But for now, this tutorial is coming to an end. If you liked what you saw, definitely subscribe, like the video, and hit the notification bell to become aware of new video tutorials that I do post. But for this, I'm going to go ahead and call it now, and it's been fun. I appreciate everybody that's watching, and I'll talk to you later.